So I'm going to call the meeting to order. Do we have any agenda amendments? No? Okay. So correspondence, items for future agendas, and public comments. Any public comments? Wow. Okay. So we'll move on to the next one, which would be the approval of the November 7th board minutes. They were a lot of minutes there.
Yeah, there was.
I'll make a motion to approve them.
Great.
I'll second it.
Seconded. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Thank you. I forgot to ask if there was discussion. Everybody's okay?
That's the way to get it
Okay.
done.
Sorry.
Terry, go Terry.
Okay.
It's a big agenda.
I've been looking forward to this moment, as I'm sure the rest of you have too. And do you want to introduce Julie, or do you want me
Yes.
to? Or?
So Kosha Patel, who's our new curriculum director, who is an amazing curriculum director so far. So far, so good. That's what everybody says. Has put together a presentation on the supervisory union-wide SBAC data. We wanted to present it to the leadership team as well, which we did a couple of weeks ago, and it was very positively received. So it's a nice way to look at how we're doing as a large system. You ready?
Yeah.
All right. I had to find the right one. Here it is. I'll click, you just sort of.
All right, I just wanted to start off by showing you what's going on at the state level. And the state is, we have Dan French, who was a new Secretary of Education, and he talked about how it's good to see that Vermont students are continuing to do positively on the Smarter Balanced. And then we have Michael Hawk, who is the Director of Assessment at the Agency of Education. And he talks a little bit about how this is just one of the tools we use to measure the quality of education our students are receiving. But he says also it's the only one that actually measures academic proficiency against the standards that Vermont has adopted in the Common Core standards. So that's a little bit from the AOE. This data is actually the state of Vermont data, and I wanted to show you some trends that they are seeing before we look at Franklin Northwest. So what you see here in this slide is the English language arts. In English language arts, we are testing students in reading, writing, listening and speaking, and research and inquiry. And all these four are combined to give the student a scale score, and then they measure the proficiency of students. So if you look at where it says change from 2017, they're seeing overall improvements in scale score, as well as in the percentage of students who are achieving proficiency in English language arts. The only one we don't have data from 2017 is grade 9, because that was just introduced for the first time. But most of the trends are positive. We are seeing improvements in English language arts in most grade levels. This is the math data. In the math, they are actually measuring how students communicate reasoning, problem solving, modeling and data analysis, and concepts and procedures. In the math, they didn't see as uniform of a trend. There are some which are showing increases and some which are showing a little bit of a decrease or not so much of a gain. But you can see in that data that in grade 4 and in grade 8, they did have a positive improvement. So now we go to the comparison between Franklin Northwest and the state of Vermont. And this is English language arts. And you can see for 3rd and 4th grade, the percentage of students who met proficiency in Franklin Northwest actually exceeded the state. So that was really exciting to see. And what you see in grades 5, 6, 7, and 8 is that there's a little gap in terms of what we achieve versus the state, but it's between 2 to 6%. Sorry, 2 to 8%. So we are seeing less of a gap between the achievement in Franklin Northwest as well as the state. At grade 9 level, this was the first time that 9th graders took the SBAC, and our students had 55% proficiency, which was at the same level as the state. So that was great to see. This is a comparison of English language arts. If we look at the data from the past 3 years, and you can see the trend from 2015 to last year and then this past year. And again, what you see in red is where we met or exceeded the state level in terms of proficiency. And if you look at the 5th grade data, in 2016-17, there was a 15% gap between the state and Franklin Northwest. And in 2017-18, it went down to 2%. And if you look at grade 8, we had a 23% gap. And then this past year, it went down to 8%. So we are seeing that we are closing those gaps, that we had huge differences in percentage of students achieving proficiency between Franklin Northwest and the state. This is our math data. And again, you can see in red, the great thing to see this past year was that our 3rd and 4th graders exceeded the standard in both English language arts and in math compared to the state averages. So one of the things we have been kind of thinking about is what made that big difference. And our current 3rd graders are the first group of students who've had the Common Core since they entered kindergarten. So now we are starting to see the impact of that consistency in their instruction. Again, you can see the differences between the percentages of proficiency at the state level and Franklin Northwest. And the biggest gap was in 9th grade. So we definitely know we need some more work there. But in most of the other grades, there was a percentage difference between 6 to 9%. So again, we are starting to close those gaps in terms of percentage of proficiency. This is again the math comparison over time. And you can see, again, we are starting to reduce the differences between the state and Franklin Northwest. What I'm going to show you now is data that's been disaggregated by different groups. So the state provides us information about, students, how they perform based on gender, on whether they were special ed or not, and whether they were in poverty or disadvantage. So here you can see the disaggregated scores. This is English language arts by gender. And in grades 3, 4, 6, 7, and 9, females exceeded the state standard. And with males, we had in grades 3, 4, 5, and then in grade 9. There was some gender gaps. We saw like 5th grade girls, we saw 6th grade boys, and then we again saw in 8th grade some gaps with the girls. So this is one of the things we just have to be aware of and think about what happened there. And as we are planning instruction, make sure that we are addressing those gaps. These are math scores by gender. And again, you see the asterisk scores are where Franklin Northwest students met or exceeded the state average. So in grades 3 and 4, we did see that in girls, they exceeded the state levels, and then also for boys. And then we are seeing some gaps as we go up the grade levels in grade 6 and then 8 and 9. So again, those are things to be aware of, and make sure that we are addressing those as we plan our instruction. This is our special ed students data, and what you see in the bottom row is students in Franklin Northwest, and special ed students were performing as well or better than the state average in English language arts for grades 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. So it was really good to see that even though the percentages aren't huge, we are still seeing that we are meeting what we are seeing at the state average. This is your disaggregated math data by special ed. And again, we saw our students with special needs are performing as well or above the state average in math in grades 5, 6, 8, and 9. This is our disaggregated data by poverty level. So these are disadvantaged students. And at the bottom, you see the students on free and reduced lunch. We are definitely closing the gap there because as you can see in grades 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and 9, our students were at or above state average. This is our math data. And again, you can see in grades 3, 4, 5 that we did meet or exceed the state standard, state average. And then we are starting to close some of those other gaps. So even though it's not as consistent as English language arts, we are seeing the gaps closing. So what does all this mean? I just put some statements that kind of summarize what we're seeing here. Franklin Northwest students are showing positive trends in English language arts. They're showing improvement in math scores for many grade levels. There are a few gender gaps in English language arts and math compared to the state average. We are definitely closing the gap for our disadvantaged students in English language arts and some grades in math. And then many of our students with special needs are meeting the percentage of proficiency compared to the state average in ELA and math. We did look at the data disaggregated by race, but because we have such small numbers in those categories, we did not see any kind of firm trends. So as we think about, what is working, because we are seeing all these positive trends, we put into place our curriculum 3 years ago, and teachers are getting really good at teaching them and then assessing those units using their proficiency scales. Our multi-tiered systems of support in all our schools, we have really worked on making that better to identify students and to provide intervention as soon as those needs arise. So a lot of schools have done a great job with that. We've also used Marzano's instructional framework for now 4 years, so there's a common language of instruction. So as teachers are talking to each other, they are able to really use that language. Last year also we started using a lot of the block assessments. So in the SBAC, there's the final summative assessment, which is reported, but they've also provided interim assessments. So these are like mini assessments you can do during the year to get your students used to the format, and you also get data from it. So the teachers can use those block assessments to identify some areas of weakness and really work on those. We just had a training on Friday for all our tech integrationists and coaches. We had Sarah Berger from the Agency of Ed come and show us some more things we can do with those block assessments and really use them to help teachers to, fill those gaps and use some of the digital library resources to work on instruction. And then the professional development, I want to really give a big thank you to Libby Bonesteel, who was our curriculum director for 5 years. She put into place a lot of excellent professional development over the past 5 years, and I think that's made a huge difference in people's knowledge of instruction and pedagogy. And then what do we still need to do? As this is a process of continuous improvement, we are still working on strengthening our multi-tiered systems of support, especially getting that first layer of instruction at the classroom level really strong, as well as early identification. As soon as we can identify kids who are starting to struggle, we want to put those interventions in place to make sure that those students don't fail or have greater needs as they go up the grade levels. We are also continuing to focus our professional development to address needs that have been identified by each school in their continuous improvement plan. And this year, our big push has been for math instruction. So we've had the math menu training where teachers are learning to differentiate math instruction. Highgate, all the teachers have had it. In Swanton, K2 teachers have had it. And in the springtime, we are hoping 3 through 6 will have it. Many of the Sheldon teachers have done it. We had a cohort of 18 teachers going for OGAP additive reasoning training. And then a couple of weeks ago, we had TJ Jameson come to Franklin and do professional development on number talks. And then he came in last week and he's doing some embedded coaching in the classrooms. At MVU, we've had Math Studio going on. This is year 4 for them. And I was actually in there when the consultant came in to work with the 3 of our new teachers. One was brand new teacher and 2 who just joined last year. And so she did some planning with them. Then they went and taught the lesson. And then she debriefed with them on what instructional moves did they make that had an impact on student learning. And that kind of embedded professional development is what is really working with our teachers. I also met with the math and literacy coaches this afternoon, and we were talking about what kind of professional development do we want to see over the next 3 years, and how do we continue strengthening math and then working on our early literacy skills too. And we have a really fabulous group of coaches, and all our administrators have been working really hard. So I'm just really happy and excited to see the progress that we are making.
Yeah.
So, you want to go to the last slide? I just put this at the end because all this progress can happen only with all of us really working together. So it's administrators, teachers, coaches, the board members, and the community and parents. I think that all of us working together is making a big difference. So thank you all for your support.
Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Coach's leadership has been just tremendous.
Thank you.
Nicely presented, too.
Yeah.
Thank you.
There were a lot of celebrations and conversations about next steps at our administrative meeting.
Are you taking questions?
Sure.
You know, I have a question. It might not, I don't know. The state does so much with data and stuff. Do they ever do longitudinal studies where they, and I'm not sure if I'm using the right word, but I'm thinking where they follow the grade each year? Do they
Well,
ever look
we've
at
been
that?
doing it at our building level, so we kind of look at a cohort and see if they're making improvements. And every board has seen their coaches presenting. I know Swanton did a fabulous job with Joan and Deb. So we are definitely looking at cohorts of students to see if we are seeing gains. And most of the time we are seeing, sometimes there's an anomaly, and when you look at the state data and then you see, okay, the state didn't do well, it might be an impact of that particular year's assessment. Sometimes there are a few really difficult questions and then all the students have an issue with that. But definitely we are following that longitudinal data. And so far we are seeing it positive. Like I said, in math, it hasn't been as consistent. And so we want to make sure that with all the professional development and the coaching, we continue to work on that and see like a more of a steady improvement.
But the state's not doing that, right? They're not doing the like we are, but is the state doing any of that, looking at longitude?
I haven't seen them put out any longitudinal
Yeah.
data.
I haven't either.
I'm glad you are. I think it's awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you, Kosha.
Thank you very
Yeah,
much.
thank you very
Thank
much.
you.
That was great. Thank you. Okay, our next item on the agenda, fiscal.
Lauren, Becky. come on up. I'm gonna switch.
Most of the budget drafts, I think you got via email. You should have gotten two on Friday, central office and early ed, and then this afternoon I sent out the special ed when I got caught up on that one. I do have copies, abbreviated copies.
So what we've been doing, and we're gonna talk about the Act 46 impact on everything we do, including the budget. We've already talked at previous board meetings that we would likely not be adopting an SU budget because of the kind of year we're having, and that we would wanna wait anyway to see what happens, and see what the impact on the budgets are, so that if, we could always wait and make adjustments later in the supervisory union budgets. At this point, because of where we are, and the state board has made its final decision, and we've been certified as a district, and we as school districts have been directed to move forward toward transition, and part of that includes budgeting differently. The month of December, we're not presenting anything different to you. We're not changing anything. We're not gonna be talking necessarily about assessments. And this information does or does not, Becky, have Sheldon in it?
It does not.
It does not. So that is the largest change that you will see as of today. We are in conversations with the Franklin Northeast Supervisory Union about transitioning the budget, and the board in Sheldon has given us permission, of course, to transition the budget information to that supervisory union. So all of those context settings are important. And your local boards this month will be looking at budgets so that you have opportunities to make adjustments to the expenditure budget. And we're trying to have an accurate baseline so that the transition board will have something to quickly work with to move forward.
I can just go over the few changes that have been made since the draft that you saw last month. Actually, there's been no increases or any changes to the central office budget. Those are the same numbers that you saw last month. In the early ed, which is the blue copy, we just made some minor changes. We added, I think, $1,000 to OTPT. We had cut back a little bit more drastically than we wanted in the first draft. And then also made some updates in dental plans, which was minimal. The biggest change you're seeing there in the expenses is the removal of the pre-KX grant, this is the final year. And then the Sheldon teacher and 2 paras, and some those tuition vouchers that we pay out. So that's the biggest change there. And then the purple copy is the combined special ed budget for all the schools in the SU. This budget's always in a state of flux. New kids come in and we have kids exit. Since last month, I think we've had 3 additional, what we call CAP contracts with NCSS, but then 2 have left. So we had a net of 1 additional. In the tuition placements, I think we've picked up 3 or 4 and lost 1. So again, the tuition this month is on an increase. Because all the SU budgets are sort of in flux. I'll keep updating you each month until we're in a place that we're ready to approve something. So those are basically the changes from the drafts that you saw last month. I don't know if there's any questions that I can answer, but.
That was succinct. Like, I understand.
Yeah. basically we're status quo right now.
Kinda,
We're
yeah.
just kind of rolling along, wait to see what happens next.
Kinda.
Exactly.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We're trying the conversations for hours this morning about what to do differently this week than the weeks before. Because at this point, we have moved into a place where we have to follow the law, so we have to prepare. And then as soon as, if we have other information, or rather an injunction, then we would stop. I think we are far enough down the road that with budgets that were prepared for local districts, that we would not have to start from scratch if we had to go backward.
No.
Right.
And we have things in play.
Yes, we do.
Each school does. Has things in play.
Do you have any sense of what the assessment, what the change would be for the remaining schools from one year to the next? in this
Waiting to
budget?
see if it's gonna be an assessment actually, or just to.
Right, there wouldn't, in a merged budget.
Well, right,
So,
but if we
the-
were to compare apples to apples.
Well, it's kind of hard to compare apples to apples because of the way you assess each section of the central office budgets, right? So some of it is by actual expenses, some of it is by, was it FTEs?
Yes, well, the early ed is by ADM. and-
Or, okay.
Yep.
So you assess differently in each area to sort of minimize the impact in a totally merged budget, which would not surprise anyone. You would have a total bottom line. You would have a spending per equalized pupil, and you would
Yeah, the tax rate.
a tax rate, the
mega
yields
district.
for the whole district, and then each community's common level of appraisal would impact their tax rate there.
I guess what I'm
But there
trying-
would be less cushion, right?
Yeah. I guess what I'm trying to get to is the discussion we had last time around the fixed costs being spread now to fewer schools,
Yeah.
with Sheldon being out. So I guess, is there a way for us to understand what the total cost is gonna be now, assuming that now that Sheldon doesn't
Right.
have that share?
I really haven't had a chance to do that analysis and what the resulting assessment would be. I can work on that towards next month if that's something that.
The good news is it's only elementary school because they didn't participate so much in MVU. We didn't charge them for MVU, did we, Sheldon? I don't
Correct.
recall. Did they?
That was just the three communities shared the MVU tax rate. Yeah.
Right, so it won't be quite as brutal maybe, huh?
It's gonna be a very different number. And we're getting information late from the state.
It's gonna be a
So-
different way of looking at things because everyone's gonna be sharing in all of the costs.
Yeah.
So it's hard to say how these budgets will impact each individual school
Right.
without knowing what your local budgets are gonna be.
Yeah.
Um,
And the revenues
So
will be
this-
allocated differently too. The revenues
Right.
will just be taken off the top of the
Right.
gross expenditures.
Right.
And then the remainder will be divided by equalized pupils by town, and then you'll have the CLA. So it's, how the revenues are applied is also another.
Yeah.
Well, sometimes I think, like, you just asked some really good questions, and I think sometimes we don't have enough information to ask the questions that we
Mhm.
know that are gonna get asked of us. Is there anything that you all are wanting to, like, you're thinking your community might ask you that you might have questions about here while we've got the experts? I mean, that might be able to,
yeah. We should know more next month. We should hopefully have some student numbers and maybe be able to make some more educated analysis than what I feel I can do right now, with only having the expenses on.
Their direction has been, up until the decision was made,
Last
that,
week.
yes, that they needed to be still, let's build our separate budgets, because that's how you start anyway, is you build your separate budgets. But things such as a big part of the Swanton budget, for example, is the assessment. Big part of the Highgate budget is the assessments. So you can't just take them out and then just look at, we have to have something that is, nothing we do will be 100%, but we need something that represents something closer so that the local boards can look at their expenditure budget and say, all right, is this what we need? Is this an efficient, and responsible budget? Because we need to do that. Yet, we do know, I mean, you all studied it. You do know that there will be a different tax rate impact. And we don't know exactly what it'll be until
Yeah.
we're there. But this is the difficult part of the conversation.
I feel for
Or
Sheldon.
just one of them.
I feel bad for Sheldon, I really do.
No, this is the hardest part.
Yeah. Well, I mean, when we did all the analysis, Franklin taxes went up just about every model. So there is gonna be some,
My concern is they'll go up more than anticipated now that Sheldon's not a part of
Yes.
this any longer.
Right.
And
Yeah.
then that'll happen in Highgate, and Swanton was stood to have a lower tax rate, and I don't know if that'll materialize any longer.
actually, when we did the budget projections, Sheldon was never included in the rate, were they?
We did a
Because
couple
thought-
of different scenarios,
Yeah.
one where Sheldon was part of the AGS as presented, and then one where they were
Yeah.
not.
I recall most of them made more sense to not put it in, because of what you all, I forget what you all said, that they'd never be part of us because they were different structure. And so I think a lot of those had it where they weren't part of it, because I forget, we did do it, you're right, the other way too.
Yeah,
But I think we paid more attention to when them weren't in it.
I think the numbers were similar.
I'm trying to think maybe too, yeah, 8 cents and stuff like that. But, I think that one thing that is different too is the fact that you had said we're gonna try and vote on the supervisory, the whole, overhead structure, everything like that, after, with everything else instead of before everything else
Yes.
too, which is helpful.
Well,
But
also,
transitions-
just because, even without Act 46, which is silly to say because that's all we talk about now, right? It's often the assumption that when the board, the SU board, adopts the central office budgets, that it's a done deal and you can't revisit that. And that's not it's a little more transparent if you're able to say, I'm just thinking about years ago in Fairfield, they struggled to pass a budget one year. And we went back, and of course Fairfield looked at adjustments, but we also looked at things that were impacting Fairfield, and that included the assessments, so.
The other thing is, I mean, regardless of what happens here, there's infrastructure costs to change systems
Yes.
and the way things are done. So transition, it's gonna be expensive.
Well, we're
There's gonna be
also
additional costs.
having to build a brand new chart of accounts while we are going through this process, which is why they're and it's line by line, code by code.
Yeah.
So they're
In new software,
in new software.
again.
Oh, God.
So
Um,
any savings you might think from Sheldon are gonna be eaten up by that,
Wow.
People time.
Yes.
People time.
Yeah. So is there anything we can do to help you all, or?
Well, I think when we're looking at both this budget and then, and I think this would be the last budget necessarily that we would make changes to. But we are looking at every single budget, especially since the process will be, if nothing changes, that the transition board and then the new district board would be responsible for adopting the budget. It really behooves us to have a lot of scrutiny. We know that the tax rate impacts are going to be different. So, while we don't want to be draconian in any way, right? We don't want to have you have very tight budgets.
Yeah,
You
everybody
know,
does, yeah.
there's not fluff in the Franklin budget. There's
Mm-hmm.
no fluff in, we don't have big budgets. So we need to be responsible and prudent. But so the local board should really look, because you have good knowledge of your schools, your individual schools right now, that those folks pay close attention to that. And then as a transition board, really have those conversations about what's important for all of our schools.
That makes sense. Anything else to ask of Becky, anyone? Are we ready to move on to the next item? Is everybody okay with that? Okay, let's move on to
This-
the service.
The
Yes.
central office budget has gone up a little bit, and now it's gonna be paid by 3 towns rather than 4. That's gonna be a significant increase for all the towns. There are no areas in the central office budget that can be adjusted because of the loss of a town.
Well, there are other things that would be picked up that are being, I mean, just Franklin comes to mind, that in a merged budget, we may lose accounts payable in Sheldon, but we would be having to pick that up from Franklin. So there would be a shift in work.
With
For
the
sure.
chart of accounts and the software change, I don't see a lot of savings in the first year, maybe.
Yeah, I don't see any place there personally, but.
Yeah.
I would
just,
expect that over time, and again, we're way jumping ahead, right? Right now, people are sitting around here morosely thinking about the fact that we have to do this to begin with. But these are the kinds of things that over time, as attrition happens, you can redesign work. And you just redesigned work in your central office last year. But as opportunities occur, you look at every opportunity, whether it's in a school or in central office, and you think about, is this the only way we can do this? Does this make sense? That's the only way that a merged district does make savings. So,
One of the major
yeah.
precepts of Act 46 is gonna save us money.
Yeah. Nobody's seen that yet. So far, all we see is more work and more time.
They actually
But-
backtracked on that after about a
Yeah.
year of touting that line. They said, well, really, it never was about the money.
Yeah,
Yeah,
now,
you're right.
you're right, Bob.
Yeah.
Jay wanted to ask something.
Julie, how much federal money are you gonna lose by losing Sheldon?
I would, we don't have numbers because they don't give us our allocations now anyway, but I think it's safe to say whatever the allocation for Sheldon was, will go with Sheldon to their new district. So for budgeting purposes, we're looking at last year allocations. And some of the grants are easier than others to do that with. Some of
I'm
them.
thinking about things like Title I, Title II.
Right, that one's a little bit easier, where IDAB, for example, is calculated on a overall population, average daily membership, and so forth. And so that one will be a little trickier to figure out. We're just gonna get used to getting less money over time, because they're gonna change our special ed funding too, so, not this year, but in the next.
Becky and Laura, I can help with the software setup too, if you need help. I've done it before.
Might take you.
Yeah.
Just might, don't raise your hand if you don't need it.
Right.
No, I've done it before.
That's great.
Get you on speed dial.
Yeah, that's helpful. So are we ready to go on to our next topic?
Yeah, this was terrible. Terry and I have spoken about this as well, and Robert will probably want to chime in at some point. Our financial server crashed. I think is that the right technical term? It stopped working. It went corrupted right around Thanksgiving.
Video on, so yeah, we'll go with that technical term.
All right.
The day before Thanksgiving.
The day before Thanksgiving.
Awesome.
So Robert worked very closely, and Sylvia at MVU, who is a technology saint. I mean, she's just
She
been
is.
amazing. They worked throughout the Thanksgiving break. Robert spent Black Friday in line at Best Buy trying to get hard drives to get us through. So all of our none of our finances we could access. Luckily, that week was not a payroll week, and they worked with consultants and found the problem and made corrections. And the backups, of course, were also corrupted. So I mean, it corrupted and then it backed up itself. So we thought we were good to go. Not great. We did lose a week's worth of data, which all will need to be recreated. This was not an outside attack or anything like that. Nobody's data was lost. This was an internal corruption. Anytime, jump in. So then, on a payroll week, it went down again. And of course, the consultants were doing everything. Robert was working endlessly. Sylvia was working endlessly to fix the problem. The decision was made that they could not guarantee that it wasn't going to continue to happen. We were able to run payroll by the skin of our teeth. No other data was lost, was it? No. So the decision, we had several options. Why don't you jump in with what the options were?
Sure, I'll just jump right to what we decided to do.
Yeah.
We have a third-party company called the Tech Group out of Williston. They've worked with us a couple of times before. Most recently, when MU had the security issues back in July and August. Very trustworthy company. So they are right now backing up our data with a device here on premise every 2 hours, and then that's also being copied on a device in their storage. They call it the Tech Vault, the storage site. And then they have another, I think it was only like another $25 a month, and we could get an online version. If the server does crash and can't be recovered with the backups would be put into the cloud on an online server, essentially. So that's the third level of the fail-safe. So that's what we're going with at this point. And then we have plans, I don't know if Laura wants to address it or you do, but we are planning to install a new server, get it set up the right way, and move forward. Tech Group is also helping with that setup.
Now, we only have so many months of needing this server, and yet there was no guarantee that we could continue over the next 6-7 months without it continuing to fail. The other options that were not as secure were going to cost about as much as buying a new server. So the
timelines were also unrealistic because it would have taken a month or two to implement, and that's just not time that we had to wait for another problem.
So
I think he did the right thing.
we've had to make the decision to, manage our budget and find the money and purchase another server. And of course, it will go to MBU when we don't need it anymore, and we certainly need servers. So that's, it'll be part of our cycling process.
Assets.
Yep, absolutely. So we wanted to bring it to your attention. We just were so grateful that we were able to make payroll. And honestly, I think Laura was having dreams that we would all just handwrite checks.
Laura spent Thanksgiving crying.
She really did. And texting the rest of us.
Just going to the bank, get cash.
Hopefully Christmas goes better, the next holiday.
But, there are plenty of things we can do with
It could have been
that.
much worse than
Yes.
when we originally found out. We were thinking a month or two of data, and that's not replaceable. So in a $45 million business, that's a lot of business to try to replace and recreate. And so the fact that it was only a week and we were able to recreate it was really, really kind of the best case scenario. So, and we did make the auditors aware, just as a side note, we have made our auditors aware that this was an issue for us. So full disclosure to all of our financial
Absolutely.
people.
Just a quick add, I've had to tell people in the past they've lost data, and usually that person's extremely upset, choice words, but everybody in the business office was like, okay, that's the way it is, we're going to work hard to recreate, and I was just
And they
floored by
have,
that.
they have, they work weekends and nights and to try to recreate data, so.
It's like, oh my God.
It was well done. It was a great example of how you guys really pulled together and got a lot done.
Well, honestly, I cannot say enough about Robert and Sylvia and everyone in the business office. But particularly, I think you just moved into the server room. And we can't thank you enough.
Yeah, thank you. I should have
So
that in the minutes.
Sylvia gets a shout out.
Yeah.
It's a big deal.
It really is.
Christmas bonus.
Yeah, there you go. That's good, thank you. Okay, thank you. And the next one is the chart of accounts.
Well, just that we're moving forward with building the single chart of accounts as we have to move forward. And it's a different, we went around in circles on this, because it's a really difficult thing to do. And yet, under the law, as of today, we really don't have the authority to do anything different than what we've been certified to be. So I don't know how to say our hope. Our hope is not one way or the other. I hope that any notification that we get comes soon. Because it's, I have to say that in the previous district where I worked, it was very difficult to put the merged budget together. Absolutely it was. But we could have our separate databases and then essentially just add them together. And then the chart of accounts was built later because there was no rush to do that.
Gotcha.
Here we're in this bizarre circumstance where it really could not be more complicated and more pressure on the business office. Just, I can't imagine it being more pressure.
Who defines it? I mean, who decides what your chart of accounts looks like?
This is a great thing.
Okay,
Watch the
sorry.
women laugh.
I know, it's me.
You would think it would come from the state of Vermont or the auditors, but
They
we're
made a whole
technically building
point.
our own.
Initially it did,
They're
and
using
then
the
they sort of
business
backpedaled.
managers to do the work because they don't know.
So they design the chart of
They don't
accounts that
know.
you have to live by, and then you have to post to the accounts that they
No.
want you to post to?
No, they said they
Oh.
wanted to have a uniform chart of accounts,
Okay.
and then brought us all together last week and
Across the state.
found that we're really not as cohesive in terms of how we break up our chart of accounts.
They are
They learned a
completely-
lot from us.
Completely relying on the
Sounds
Vermont
like a lot of
Association.
journal entries.
The FASBO group that meets is building this chart of accounts, and it's not a standard chart of accounts. It is
Okay, that's what I didn't get.
half of a standard chart of accounts.
That's what I didn't get. So basically, you're gonna be doing a lot of journal entries because you're gonna think it needs to go someplace and they're gonna decide it goes someplace else.
Hopefully not.
Say it, Laura.
They're rolling everything up.
Um,
So while we need the minutia, we need the detail, the state of Vermont doesn't to report to the feds.
okay.
So they just keep saying, well, we roll everything up, so what we thought originally a uniform chart of accounts meant
Everybody's got a 610.
Technology supply is
Right.
going to be coded to a 2225 610, but
Office
now there's like
expense.
20 digits.
Right.
But no, now they're like, well, if you wanna use that, go ahead, and if you wanna use that, that's fine, cause we're just gonna roll it up anyway. Oh, why don't you tell us what you wanna use?
That's
Oh,
worse.
You got this in writing?
So it's bad, I don't mean to be
a lot of
flip
notes.
about it, but
Lot
it's
of
very
That's
bad.
worse.
A lot of notes.
It's going to be a
that's
challenge. And yes.
Ugh.
We spent 3 days working 10-hour days in a group of 100 people with the entire AOE staff there, and we barely touched the surface.
Oh,
Barely touched the surface.
But emotions were running pretty high,
I
and
bet.
you know, just tell us, you tell us
I
what you
got
want
it.
us to
Yeah.
do, and we'll
Yeah.
do it.
Yeah.
But this, what do you wanna do, and you do this, and you can all do different things, it's not cohesive.
It's
not
It's not a
uniform.
uniform chart
If
of
we're all
accounts.
doing
And
different
putting the
things.
work on
Sounds just wrong.
the
Yeah.
school districts.
And it's
Sounds
waste of
sloppy.
Work that we
resources.
have to
Sounds
do
sloppy.
instead of them.
With everybody doing their own, so it has to be
Yeah.
designed how many times?
Yeah, well, when we did
Not sure
this
why I
a
expected
few
it.
years ago, when we had to convert our software a couple of years ago, it was all done by the software people.
Company.
Right.
And now
Yeah.
we're having to do it ourselves.
I'd like to
and we're not
retract my
tech
earlier
people.
statement. I do not want that.
I knew that was
wondering about the same thing, given all this.
You're already
Oh.
You're on camera with that
That's
one.
right. I already got your number.
Yeah.
So this is
Another
part of
expense.
why, this is part of why they're building a single chart of accounts rather than 6 with, because it's really the most straightforward thing to do. And if,
For them.
something, for them, if it needs to stop and we need to regroup, then that's what we'll do. But these are the kinds of things that, you have Act 46 and then you layer these other mandates on top of them, and
Mandate.
What were we saying about saving money?
Times in 1 year left.
Because this is a lot of time, this is time
But they're on
intensive.
very strict timelines, and I guess I
Yes.
want the board to be aware of
I'm
that,
sorry.
because we have until July one
Sounds like a waste
to
of time.
implement the new chart of accounts, that's not negotiable. You only get support with the uniform chart of accounts if you buy into the new software, which they're paying for, but, that also starts January one, and you have to implement in July. So everything in 6 months,
Yes.
we're gonna take 6 entities, turn it into one. We're going to convert our chart of accounts to a whole new chart of accounts, and we're going to learn a completely new software and implement it in 6 months.
Oh,
So,
Wow.
I did
Yes,
it
we
3
have a
times
lot
last year.
Yep.
You did it 3 times? Oh,
thought they were gonna
you
push
get
it
your
right
state
out.
trial. That's perfect. You've got lots of experience.
they have
Oh,
not
sorry.
pushed any data out.
What?
No.
Sorry.
No, I think they were gonna make the recommendation to legislature when they sent the final plan back to them to do that, but I don't know if that recommendation was part of their package or not.
On which piece, which,
On the implementation of the
Chart of
proposed
accounts.
mergers.
Oh, after
mergers.
6. We did not see anything. I think they, when we talked, John, with the Secretary of Ed on the phone with Sheldon, he was suggesting that that might occur. And I don't know what their thoughts are currently at the agency, and certainly we didn't hear from the state board that they made that kind of a recommendation, so.
It's shocking they've shown so much concern to this point that
So much concern.
Well, that just puts the icing on the cake, though, that chart of accounts. That's just.
Oh my God.
Will you be able to work with anybody that was at that meeting, so you don't have to, like, you're not gonna have 36 districts, you know, working on the same thing at the same time, or?
Oh, Becky doesn't look so, she doesn't look so confident over there.
I hope you said confident, not competent.
He meant one. Not-
Okay. Wow.
we have a lot to figure out, let's just put it that way.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry, guys, thank you. So are we ready to move on? Did you have your hand up, Jay?
Just a matter of information for folks. I've been working with David Kelly and the crew all weekend. The class action lawsuit is planned on, being submitted on 17th.
Ah, okay, can you wait, Jay, because we're gonna get to that
Okay.
with the old business and the next, because that'll be good.
Okay.
Thank you. Because the superintendent's report is
Yep.
up. Okay.
Yes, and superintendent's report may touch on Act 46, just briefly.
May.
But I won't go too much into it because, of course, we're gonna go through the default articles. But first, we were talking earlier, before the meeting started, about how we didn't really get fall. We had summer and then it rained and then snow came. And we was talking with Chris today and, he said, how much did you get around the snowstorm that we didn't close school? And it's just so, it really made me want to share with the board what my process is, because it's always very difficult to close school. And it's not new to me. I've been closing school in my previous district for quite a while. And every time the current superintendent over there goes on vacation and left it to me, we had to close school, guaranteed. So, always, first off, my default is that we want school to be open. We want kids and families where they're supposed to be, have an education, having lunch and breakfast, and being safe during the day. I know as a parent, when there was an unexpected snow day, I was lucky enough to be in education, and usually my school where I worked matched the school where my kids went to school. Not always, but sometimes. But certainly, most of our families don't work in education, and they have to make arrangements, and it's disrupting to everybody. So that's our default. And we live in Vermont. It snows. We're used to that. The bus companies are prepared for snow. All of that is a given. And still, we have pretty lousy roads sometimes. And that snowstorm on the 16th, we were at MVU the night before. The whole board is there saying, we're not closing school. What are you, crazy? There's nothing. There's not even a cloud in the sky. And didn't we get hammered? And that one, I put that little picture up there. I get these alerts from the National Weather Service all the time now because I'm on their list. And down to the hourly snow accumulation statistics, so that we can look at when is it expected to come, when is it not expected to come, so we can think about drive time. So I'm looking at all of those predictions before the event, which is why I was looking at that school board saying, well, I don't know, it's not looking good according to the weather service. So we had that kind of heads up. And even then, up very early, talking with the bus companies, talking about the road conditions, conferring with other superintendents, what's it like up in Enosburg, what's happening in St. Albans, all of that, so that we can make that call quite early, because the buses, families, teachers, they all need to know very early. So my goal is always to have that decision by 5:30 in the morning. So then things like the 2 days where it snowed and nobody expected it to snow happened. The timing of that, there was no National Weather Report expectation that we were going to get hit like that. And in the morning, the bus companies thought it was fine. When kids were on the bus is when it started to hit. So I just wanted to make sure people understand. People on the phone were just lovely. I mean, people sometimes are upset, and I was able to say, I was upset too. I had no idea it was going to look like this. This threw us all. There was no one in the region who thought this was going to happen. And I don't like kids to be unsafe on buses. None of us do. So where we can predict it, we're going to do everything we can. And where we can't predict it, we're going to do our best. I know it is very unsafe to send kids home in the middle of the school day. Nobody's necessarily at home. The roads are still very bad. It's always dangerous to send kids home unless there's an actual the preponderance of evidence is that they'd be safer at home. But typically that means transporting kids somewhere. So usually it is best, and the road crews have more opportunity to clear the roads more effectively. So we've been doing some regrouping with school bus companies, talking about after-school programs, and if it snows continuously, that we may do closing of after-school activities as well. Also difficult when it's predicted to stop and then it doesn't. And to close after-school activities, you really need to make that decision around noon. So that's I don't know if anybody has any questions. It's the least, even with Act 46, it's the least fun part of
Wow.
because you are truly you're making
Changing the
predictions.
lifestyle of the day.
Yeah, I know a lot of people would like you to make the decision ahead of time. And once in a great while, the whole state knows we're shutting down because the big storm's coming. But even you're surprised sometimes. So it's difficult to do until making sure in the morning.
So it's a pretty stressful night for you, the night before, or that morning, trying to make all those decisions.
I
Sitting
have
watching.
I have a routine, right? So I know that it's on my radar, and the literal radar, and I examine, and if it's pretty sure, the software that pushes out the closings, you can record your message ahead of time. You can have that all sounding fine and ready to go. And then you can then get up at 4:30 and make your phone calls and go from there and decide whether it's still looking that bad or whether there's been a change. So that's a little reassuring. Just having to make a recording off the cuff at 4:30 in the morning is not always. So I have to call.
Mine would be
I was wondering why
bad.
you sounded so good on that recording.
Well,
She
yeah,
did the
great.
day before.
Yeah, now I get it. Like,
Great radio voice. But no, I think it's just you have to just know you're going to make the best decision you can. And once you make the decision, you can't second guess yourself.
Do road commissioners or towns have those? Do that someone, or do they call you, or?
I do
They
not
go-
have those connections now,
I
and
know
that
they
is
used to.
not what the former process was.
No, it wasn't.
But I do it indirectly through the bus companies.
Yeah.
So, sometimes that's actually the best because the road companies are calling the bus company
Yeah.
back and forth. So it actually narrows down the number of people we're reaching out to.
That's smart.
But I really would like to get some of those phone numbers just in case. Especially if we're talking about particular roads.
Mm.
But,
Well, thanks.
Good job. It's not
well,
Yeah.
easy.
on the positive side, I have to say, it's holiday concerts and things like that are going on. I'm not able to go to all of them because there's board meetings a lot of times. But I was able to go to Franklin's holiday performance as it was in the middle of the day on Friday, and it was just wonderful. And all of Franklin was there, and which is great to see. And students from pre-K through 6th grade performed holiday music, and it was just wonderful. And MVU has a Christmas Carol that is this weekend, Friday and Saturday. I think Sunday they have a matinee, but it might just be Saturday.
No, they have
I
a
think it's
Sunday.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's what I thought at first, but I saw it somewhere else. So I encourage people to attend that too. And of course, all of our Highgate has a concert on the 19th.
Yeah.
But Swanton has board meeting that night, so I won't be able to go to that one. But it's a wonderful time to see the students and community support for students. It's just, I mean, Highgate, Franklin was the great example of the whole community goes to see because everybody knows someone who's in that performance. And so it's just wonderful. And that's the way it is in all our schools, I'm sure. And Kosha has left, but I have to tell you, last week we had a meeting that had originally been on that snow day. That was a joint meeting of superintendents, curriculum directors, and special ed directors. We meet typically once a year. It's been shifted to 3 times a year, and our work is focused on personalized learning plans. So this is the whole Champlain Valley region of leadership in those areas, and focused on students and personalized learning, which is really nice to have that focus. This meeting, we invited Jen DeSorger, Leslie, I can't think of Leslie's, Rainville, from Sheldon, and Linda Rouse Turner, and they presented our personalized learning plans, what our focus has been, and really, we've been at the very beginning stages. The law has been in place for, I think, 2 years, that you had to have plans, and we have, but it hasn't been a major area of focus. Our focus has really been on the alternate pathways for students, making sure that dual enrollment opportunities were there, making sure that career exploration, work experience, and so forth was in place, not to mention proficiency. So it was wonderful because each of the school districts presented as well, and we were able to see what they were doing, what platforms they used for their PLPs. If you think about it, even just following the template the state gives, your focus of that PLP can be very different depending on what you value and what's important in your school. And for us, we had really great conversations about next steps and what we think we value for our kids. Young people around here really don't know what their career opportunities are. They don't necessarily have a vision of what opportunities are out there. So we had some conversations about how our PLPs could help with that, rather than just documenting activities. So that was wonderful. But then going around and seeing what all the other districts were doing was informative, but it left us feeling that we were in a very similar place to most other schools, and that frankly we just had a very good team of people doing this work. So I was just so impressed with the team that we brought, and I thought that they made our schools look pretty good. And we learned a lot from schools that had been focusing on this more. So it was very informative. We will be talking about next steps with the administrative team and really thinking about how we can have teacher leadership and administrators working together on this. And the last thing I wanted to talk about was Act 46. But I really think that we've pretty much talked about it, except we'll go forward and do I keep wanting them to call them draft articles, but the default articles, and have that conversation later in the agenda. There's an early childhood and curriculum update in here. Kosha's left, and Andrea is at a conference in Burlington on early childhood, so she was unable to be here tonight. But Tanya was not able to get into the report, so I'm wondering if you have any updates.
I think the biggest update might be, and just to tag on to what Julie was talking about in terms of the PLP work and the PPGRs, is that it really is the case that different school districts have kind of gone at it in a different way. So some have focused on that personalized learning first, some are focused on the proficiency-based learning first, and so they're kind of, everyone's in different places. But I had the opportunity recently on one of the half-day in-services to work with a team at MBU, so the ninth grade teachers and special educators, and then myself and one of their instructional coaches, our special ed coach, and then the special ed coordinator at MBU, and we really focused with that team on looking at the PPGRs, the proficiency-based graduation requirements, and then their grade level standards. Because part of what the struggle, and it's a healthy struggle, and I think it's happening across the state really, is this conversation about, okay, so if we're saying all kids will meet this standard, what about it? What happens when kids aren't meeting that standard and need more time, right? What does that mean for kids with IEPs, or for whom English isn't their first language? So it was really a good conversation with those teachers to say, okay, how can we back those standards up? How can we afford them more time? How do we report that on the report cards? So that's the cohort of kids right now that will be graduating in 2022, right? The freshmen with the first proficiency-based graduation requirements. So we're working with those teachers directly to talk about those issues and figure out how to iron some of that out. And it's not easy because there aren't answers, right? It's not a black and white, here's how you do it. Partly because the state has absolutely left those decisions up to local entities, and people are interpreting it the best they can. And it's a lot of contextual work, right? It has to do with where we are, our school, what we say is important for our kids. So that's the work that they're doing there, and then I got to be a part of that during that in-service, and I think it was just really great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh. So I think that's probably my big highlight
Nice.
since we met last. And other than that, just regular old day-to-day.
Thank you.
Robert, I don't know if you have anything to add to the Tyler or the.
No, that's been my life.
Yeah.
My wife says it's good that the server has a male name as Tyler, because I'm spending way too much time with it. That's all I can add.
She's keeping her sense of humor.
Yeah, she did. Sorry, yeah.
Yes. Thank you to her too. Okay.
Great, thank you. So, next item. And Jay, you wanted to do something with this too, but how should we do this? You want to talk first, Julie? Or
Well,
ask
I don't
Jay?
know if you want to give your update
Yeah.
before we jump into what the presentation is.
I can do that. For the last week and a half or so, I've been working in the legal loop, I guess, for lack of a better term, doing a lot of research, some of which I won't talk about here because, for obvious reasons,
Right.
it's a legal issue. But at any rate, some of the research that we've been looking at is the role of the electorate in the conveyance of municipal property. And believe it or not, there's no less than 7 different statutes that relate to the role that the electorate plays in the conveyance of public property, none of which have been amended by Act 46 or Act 49 or affected by the 3,400 rules or any of that. Originally, when I met with the joint meeting of the Franklin Board and the Select Board, research wasn't complete. We added another statute that we didn't count on, which happened to be 16706 Act. But at any rate, the long and short of it is that eventually, well, since the state Board of Education officially approved their default articles on the 28th of November, that triggers section 10 as amended by Act 49, which means that this board has 90 days to meet and create they refer to it as a like 706B committee. They don't actually mandate a 706, but they do say that a committee be formed along the same method that was used to create 706B. And you're charged with coming up with your own articles of agreement within the next 90 days. 90 days from the 28th of November. And if you can't come up with those articles of agreement by that time, then the state default articles apply. And particularly in this case, Article 6, which is the article that describes the manner in which the assets will be conveyed. In other words, your assets of your school districts will be conveyed which include the land, the buildings, the personal belongings, and all the internal content for an amount of $1. Eventually what happens is there are other statutes that come into play here, and what happens is that the legislative body, in this case it would be the school board from each town that are subject to a merger. This is defined in Title 24, 1061. And it states that the legislative body is required to provide notice of the intent to convey public municipal property. And that notice has to be filed and it has to be posted in 3 places in the town, one at the town clerk's office or near the town clerk's, and also has to be posted in a newspaper of general circulation. That notice has to be posted 30 days before the actual conveyance takes place. Now, the conveyance takes place with one exception, and that is if 5% of the voters submit a petition that oppose the conveyance, then that requires the petition to be brought before the electorate by the public, by the legislative body. So it's just an example of some of the laws that play in. There's others that play into the requirement that the electorate has a vote, or has a right to vote on the conveyance of the property that is owned by the municipality. And so the state board they're kind of ignoring that at this point in time. I'm not really sure I know why, but there's gotta be a strategy that they must be thinking. But at any rate, these are some of the things that you can't avoid. I won't go into a lot more detail about the other statutes because it's part of the class action suit.
Right.
That will be filed, it's planned on being filed on the 17th.
Okay, that's what we're, so
19th by the latest.
17th of December, 19th at the latest?
Yeah, that'll be next Monday or next Wednesday at the latest.
And with legalities, how long would it take after that for an injunction to be known or not known?
I think that you'll know fairly quickly whether an injunction is gonna be issued by the courts. We're not sure what court we're thinking. It'll be the Washington County Court that the actual lawsuit will be filed in. But there's a good chance that there will be an injunction placed because I'll tell you, these attorneys, it's a good thing there's 7 of them because they have mountains, mountains of documents and evidence, and it's unbelievable. I wouldn't look for a resolution of the lawsuit anytime soon. I think this is gonna be a long, drawn-out court battle. It could last for years. I don't see it being resolved anytime soon.
The injunction is more, what is like I think you're right about the years and years. It's the
Yeah.
injunction, I think that's more,
The timely piece.
Right.
Pertinent for us right now.
yes,
So
that's
what-
it, thank you.
What's the process in the meantime?
Well, I think that's where we're gonna segue to next with Julie, in terms of what do we do with the
Right.
process in the meantime. Is that accurate?
Well, if there's an injunction that's placed on this case.
Then we stop.
It could
Yep.
be years before it's settled.
Right, and then we stop, but at least it'll be years that we invest money, that, it'll be years. It's not like it'll be just, you know, a year that we're investing all kinds of money here, and then we gotta turn around and invest it again here or something, so.
I spoke to Margaret, this is kind of funny, but I spoke to Margaret this morning. There's a lot of civil disobedience that is cropping up now. I mean, some school boards that are facing forced mergers are actually electing their pet dogs as members of the board. I mean, it's an attitude out there across the state that's caused as much chaos as possible in the meantime.
Well, that'll be interesting for us to talk about tonight,
It's all been chaos.
on what we're gonna do, because we gotta move forward in some way. And so
Right.
it's up to us to decide how we're gonna move forward based on what we think
Yep.
we need to do, which happens tonight, right?
So many legal aspects now that we're coming to the timelines that are designed in Act 46. I mean, there are so many, it's just, it goes to your mind.
Yeah, I believe it. So, shall we get some education again here
Well,
on this
and
book?
so, this presentation was, the presentation that the Vermont School Board Association put on it was going to be a webinar last week, but due to illness, they weren't able to put it on, so I was able to get it, and there will be pieces that disagree. The State Board of Ed, the Agency of Ed, don't have the same legal opinions as David Kelly and that group, which is not gonna be a surprise to anybody. But I'm gonna share what their presentation and what the direction we're being given is.
By the way, before you do, I just wanna say I checked the GoFundMe page, and there's $9,530 or something for there today.
That's not up to date.
Ah,
Good. So some of these are the things that we've been talking about already, that the final report was issued, the decision was made November 28th, and the final report was published on November 30th. Default articles of agreement for each new union school district formed by the report was also published. You should have, if you don't have one, please let me know, a copy of the default articles for the Franklin Northwest Unified Union School District, and that name is subject to change. But that was the name that they gave us for purposes. Actually, that surprised me, because they've been talking about the Missisquoi Valley Unified School District all this time.
They didn't name us the Franklin Northeast?
No, they actually didn't, they caught those mistakes in the draft. So, so immediate tasks for merged districts, and I also wanna add to this, I'm attending a meeting on Monday the 17th, in Montpelier with other superintendents, both that have been merged and that are going through this imposed merger, so that we can identify questions, and that the Superintendents Association and the School Boards Association can give us some immediate support. And I'm sure there will be follow-up meetings. So, each member district of the merged district must appoint 2 members to sit on the transitional board. The default is the chair and the clerk, unless other members are selected by a majority of the board. So I want you to be thinking about that this month. Superintendent works with the Secretary of Ed to draft the warning for the organizational meeting. They've given us a template. It's very straightforward template of the articles that need to be voted on by the electorate in that meeting. And the meeting must be warned between 30 to 40 days in advance. So the warning has to happen before December 28th, and the organizational meeting has to be held by January 29th to be in compliance with the timelines. Our plan is to warn the meeting before Christmas, and then we have 40 days. That will be within the 40 days. I've reached out to the Secretary of Education's office because the secretary or designee needs to open the meeting. And I am looking at that last weekend in January, Martin Luther King week, and seeing what the availability is there. And part of my thinking is, given our circumstances, the Secretary of Education should come up and open our meeting. So, that's enough said about that.
Julie?
Yes.
I'm not sure I'm clear. I know each district will have a transitional board.
Yes.
So does this board have a transitional board, or what happens with the SU board? What is that?
So there's a couple.
How do we fit in?
There's a couple of things there. When they're talking about a transitional board, they mean a board that will get us from January 29th until town meeting day, when the new district board would be elected. That board will be made up not of the SU board, but 2 members from MVU, 2 from Swanton, 2 from Highgate, 2 from Franklin.
You mean the temporary board?
The temporary board.
Yeah.
We would be voting on 6 people, not 8. MVU does not fall into the transition board that's elected. That would be a 6-member board, unless we go through the process to amend the default articles and try and get that to be 3 members per school. And that's a possibility that we can talk about in a minute.
I guess I don't get that. Why wouldn't MVU be a part of that?
We're not
Because
a
it's
municipality.
not a town.
We're not a municipality.
Okay, gotcha.
Our high school.
But for the purposes of all hands on deck, trying to get things ready for
Yeah,
that,
I got it.
they're including Union High School, but not SU members on that first transition board. So, and we went over some of this as repeat from last month, but the transitional board would be sworn in January. The voters that attend that meeting will determine whether the budgets and other elections and ballot items would be voted on by Australian ballot or in a town meeting style. It would not be at town meeting, but town meeting style meeting every year. And then you would have your first transitional board meeting, usually within 14 days. It really makes sense to just have it that night. It may be a very brief meeting to set up schedule for the next several meetings, and you would have to elect a chair and a clerk at that meeting. Boards of the merged district must decide whether to form an amendment committee or not. That is going to be one of the immediate tasks of that board. Now, I wish it was something this board could do, because you could almost have it at that meeting, because that's 60 days in to your 90-day timeline. So if you wanted to amend, say, the number of people sitting on the new board to 3 instead of 2, like MVU is, you could do that. If you wanted to make it explicit about conveyance of property or anything like that, and talk about it in that meeting, but apparently it's only that transition board that gets sworn in that has the ability to do that.
So just to play, just a possibility. So let's say there was something that we wanted to change on the,
Right.
and so we would, let's say it was done up by this board, and then suggest it to the transition board.
Yep.
When they met, and they could approve it that night.
They could,
So then it could be, because you gotta,
but you'd have to warn it, and only they could warn it. So it would still have to be another meeting.
but you could warn it and still meet a deadline
You could.
of the February. Because I was thinking it'd be impossible to even meet the deadline the way they've got it set up.
No, it's not impossible, but it's definitely set up so that communities that have had multiple votes and already have something different, and that's not what these boards did. So, you could take the default and just amend a few pieces, strengthen or change. That's a possibility. Now, one of the differences between this advice that we're getting from the agency and the school board association, et cetera, is they consider this amendment and going to the voters with the articles as optional. I think that's where the disagreement is. Jay.
Well, if I could, I would strongly caution this board about where you get your advice from. It would seem to make perfect sense that you should have a lead person, with all due respect, Julie, that you should have a lead person that's in contact with the attorneys that are fighting the case in court. Because I can tell you that they don't agree with this.
Right.
And you can make a mistake, and an example of that mistake could be, let's say if you go ahead and you convey the property to a new consolidated board, then how do you think that's gonna affect your ability to fight your case in court? How do you defend the property that you no longer own?
Yeah.
I don't understand, you mean at that organizational meeting, you surrender your property?
No, that would be on July
What
1st.
I'm talking about is the implementation of Article 6.
Yeah.
But
So-
that's July 1st.
No, not necessarily.
You're
So-
talking about Article 6 in terms of giving money, giving your funds
me-
back.
Let me go back to what I was saying earlier. The existing statutes that apply in this case, since the state board has made a decision to approve their articles of agreement on the 28th, your board has a responsibility to create a committee to come up with alternative articles, or else you have to implement Article 6 among the rest of the articles in the state's default articles, which means that you're required to sell your assets or convey those assets to the new consolidated board, okay? So you have 90 days to create that committee, and if you create the committee and you can't agree on your articles agreement, you have to implement the default articles. So after the 90 days, those articles could be implemented at any time where that public entity or that legal body, legislative body, could warn the taxpayers to sell those articles as described in Article 6. That could happen anytime after the 91st day. So 91 days from November 28th, the legal legislative body could warn the public of the impending conveyance of the property. And if they do that, and no petition is submitted from 5% of the voters to object to the conveyance of that property, then the property gets conveyed.
I think though, I guess I would go,
And so if that happens along that timeline, then you no longer own the property that your attorneys are trying to protect, they're trying to fight to protect.
I guess my concern here is that it's gonna be a transition, there's gonna be 2, 2, and 2. So it's not like so I don't see why anyone would make that happen until the total deadline, or would change that amendment or something. I don't quite understand that.
Terry, it's in statute. You have to convey that property as per Article 6 of the state's default articles.
Unless you change it before July 1st.
You can't change the state default articles.
Right.
You can't?
Unless you do so within 90 days.
Yeah, there's
But
time
that's not
constraints.
really one that
Okay.
we
It's the
can
time
change.
constraints
Okay,
that
so I'm
are-
sorry, I don't mean to get us, I just was
No,
wondering
it's
what
just-
the concerns
No.
were.
I
It's
just
a
need to
constr-
impress upon you, you need to be very careful.
I hear what
And
you're saying.
You need to create a point person to maintain contact and stay in the loop with the attorneys that are fighting this battle for you.
Within deadlines.
Because if you don't, you can very easily make a mistake, and the state board is not going, and I'm sorry, but I hate to say this about the Vermont School Board Association, but I don't trust them. And the reason why I don't is because they signed that memo that I found last year. And they were part of that memo that last year that the Superintendents Association put out, that pledge of support for Act 46 with the removal of the reduction in superintendents in the state of Vermont. So it was the Vermont School Board Association, Vermont Principal Association, Vermont Superintendents. So if I'm going to put my trust in somebody, I'm going to put my trust in the attorneys that are defending me. And I would caution this board to do the same thing. Otherwise, I'm telling you, after working with these guys for the last couple of weeks, there are all kinds of tripwires, and you could very easily make a mistake. You have to be very careful from this point forward.
And the way I see it, sorry, go ahead.
No, could you go back to the previous screen?
Sure.
And so the composition of the committee that's going to decide on whether to change those articles of agreement
would be proportional.
Will be proportional.
Exactly.
That can't be changed.
That's
Correct.
my understanding.
Right.
What, it's supposed to be consistent with a 706 committee, which was proportional, which was part of the issue that you all had in creating a 706 committee, I understand. So what I'm presenting you today is the information we're getting from the Agency of Ed. This presentation was put together for school board members by the VSBA, but it's not any different than what our draft articles are, default articles are, that have been shared with us. I agree that we should likely have some legal advice about our implementation in we need to implement as we are being directed while the lawsuit is going on, and that does put us in some tricky places.
I think what we need to do, because the complicating factor here is that the lawsuit is not on the behalf of the Franklin Northwest Board.
Correct.
It's on behalf of 2 of the towns that are remaining within Franklin Northwest. So I think what we need to do is make sure that those towns are in contact with that attorney, and that group of attorneys, as well as kind of interfacing with our legal counsel as well. And I think it might be beneficial if we're having our legal representation at least interfacing and talking with the group that's doing the lawsuit, so that they're talking lawyer to lawyer and not relying on a point person.
They don't even have to agree, they just have to be hearing what each other are saying directly. Yeah.
Because I know I can certainly lose a lot in translation when I'm trying to talk legalese.
And I know our attorney said that they would do that for
Good.
us.
And that's exactly what I was gonna suggest, that, we have our attorney, but of course we'll always listen to input, and there's gonna be, like you said, 4 representatives from the 2 towns, and 2 from the 1 town that isn't.
Right.
So I think we're pretty safe in that respect.
Yeah, I just think we have to be vigilant, make sure we don't.
Yes, and I think that's what Jay was trying to say too, right, Jay? To not just think that there's only one option.
Well, I mean, you're getting into the nuts and bolts of Act 46 now, Act 49, and now it's gonna get much more critical that you make sure that every single word of the act is understood. And I think that it would be a big mistake for this board, the time that I've spent with them is just, what I came away from it is that there are so many traps that are built into this that it takes a team of attorneys to keep you out of trouble.
Jeez.
Comfort
So
level.
it would be very much to your disadvantage if you didn't have an intimate line of communication with the attorneys that are defending you.
I think Bob said it well.
And maintaining it, because I'll tell you, from what I saw the last couple of weeks, very devious.
Well, the hope is that before we get to that organizational meeting and we have to worry about that the injunction is in place, and that kind of takes the onus off us and puts it in the legal venue where it needs to be.
Why is it like that? I don't understand.
What do you mean?
Why is it set up like that? Why is there traps? Why is
Well,
it devious?
they
I don't get it.
I mean, I guess the best answer to the question that would elaborate maybe an answer to that is, why didn't they evaluate our AGS on those merits? And rather than, they had a plan. The plan was to merge Missisquoi, the existing Union School District, as a preferred structure. They redistricted Sheldon. They even violated their own new geographic isolation metrics, because their new metrics are 15 miles door to door. Sheldon from Berkshire is 14.1 miles. Well, I have 3 nephews and 1 niece that lives on the Macy Road. They're 18 miles from Berkshire. And I know that there's another 12 kids that live on the Duffy Hill Road that exceed the 15-mile limit. So there's 5% of their students live beyond the 15 miles, but the position that the state is saying is that, well, Sheldon is not gonna close. Well, how the heck do they know that? Because that depends on the voters of Berkshire, Montgomery, and Bakersfield.
Right.
So they can't guarantee that it's not gonna close. I mean, it probably won't, but they can't guarantee that. So,
Maybe we should go through some of the
and
default.
the state board makes no secret about it. That's what is astounding about it. They said, well, the reason why they redistrict Sheldon is because it makes the remaining members of Franklin Northwest a preferred structure. That's the reason. They didn't make this decision on the basis of our alternative governance structure proposal. They made it on that basis, which, by the way, that decision was made over a year ago.
It's very frustrating for the amount of work and effort.
They're on a mission, and they're gonna do everything they can to accomplish that mission.
Arrogant.
No,
I wish they would've
process
just
has been for sure.
said that from the start.
Just use,
A lot of time.
Yeah.
So what I'm sharing with you is the information we're getting of what school districts need to do, school boards need to do, according to the agency of ed. So when Jay's talking about traps, I mean, that's for those lawyers to be finding, that's part of the legal case. And what we're obliged to do, and of course we will have our attorneys check in, but what we're obliged to do is follow the process that we're told to follow. So, and there are areas where we can probably make some decisions. One of them is the default articles of agreement. We're being told that it's optional for us to have a study committee go to the voters with those by February 28th.
Of default ones.
The default ones. So we could come up with our own. We could take the default ones and tweak them and then warn it properly and bring them to the voters. If that's done before February 28th, that's the process we would use. If we allow them to be imposed upon us and feel like we can live with them, and that is what we want to go through tonight, is what some of those are, so we can be thinking about that. Then we always would have the opportunity, and actually the obligation, because some of these default articles expire, so you're going to want to bring them to the voters in the future anyway, to amend them.
Just bear in mind, if you create those default articles, those articles describe the conveyance of property, you still have to warn the voters. And the voters get to vote on them.
Be interesting if the voters say no.
Say no.
Well,
What's gonna happen?
which, you know, they would.
I
Yeah.
can tell you, if you can't agree on articles of agreement, and you come to the voters with an article to sell all of your school assets for $1, that's not gonna go over very well.
That is true. Our playground.
So the votes that are required, is it okay for me to?
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, I don't want to cut anybody off
Thank you.
anyway. So possibly amending the default articles by February 28th, electing members of the merged district board at town meeting, approving a budget. They recommend no later than May 1st. I think it's going to be a difficult budget year if we get to this point. So that's where we would want to warn that as early as practical. And then each of these votes, of course, has to be preceded by a 30 to 40-day warning period, just like any vote. So those are some things that we talked about last time. I wanted to go through the articles, and you've all been sent the Franklin Northwest articles that are specific to us. And what is different about this for Sheldon is they already have articles of agreement that are in place for the Northern Mountain Valley Unified District. So Sheldon will be working not with default articles, but the articles that are in place for that district. So I just wanted to be clear about that. So the first article just creates the new union district, including a list of the forming districts, the temporary legal name of the district, and a list of resident students. So Highgate, Franklin, and Swanton. And including the MVU school district as well. And this is, they've given us the Franklin Northwest Supervisory Unified Union School District, or I get rid of the supervisory, I just got overly excited there. And that is a name that the temporary or new district board on its own could change without a vote from anybody. They can just say, well, we don't like that, we want to be called Missisquoi something, or we want to be called something else entirely. They can do that. Article 2 talks about the grades operated and or tuitioned, and in this case it's pre-K through 12 district. And they list names so that it's very clear that there won't be any changes within two years. And that's where if we either in 90 days or after the fact make changes, we may want to take away some of these sunsetting dates and make things longer lasting. So, you know, that we always would be a pre-K through 12 tuitioning district unless the electorate made a change there, for example. Attendance and restructuring is Article 3. It covers attendance at schools in academic years 20 and 21, and not oops, I didn't mean to do that. And not restructuring any grades. I think people have spoken about how you can restructure a school out of existence by, or some schools combine grades and shift students around. This, in our articles, are creating a moratorium that there won't be any changing of grade configurations or changing of attendance areas. So nobody's moving students to a different school. And these are the kinds of things that are in for 2 years that amending either before or later, we could just strengthen that so that there wouldn't be any sunsetting of changing grade configurations. The same thing, Article 4 speaks to closing buildings. Academic years 2020 and 21, and then after that, in 1920 and 2021, the new district shall not close any school building conveyed to it by a forming district or cease using the building to provide direct education in at least one grade unless first approved by the voters residing in the town in which the school is located. That's pretty strong language, but it has a sunsetting date in these default articles. So again, this would be one that in the future you would want to look at and probably keep it without the sunset, so that you could not close Swanton School without the voters of Swanton, majority of voters of Swanton, supporting closing that school in that town. What they have done is then gone to 2022, then the Union District Board shall not close any school unless approved by the electorate of the new Union District, which would mean all 3 towns. So this would be something that the board would likely, I'm just predicting, want to look at amending. So the stronger language is never closing a school unless the voters of that town choose to do so. So Article 5 covers indebtedness, including capital debt, fund surpluses, and transfer of debt and funds. Requires that the new district assume all indebtedness that exists on June 30th, 2019, including capital debt. That the new district assumes all operating surpluses, deficits, and fund balances of the forming districts that exist at the close of business on June 30th, 2019. And the new district is required to apply any reserve fund for the fund-specific purpose, if identified, unless otherwise determined through appropriate legal procedures. So, for example, if you have a fund for a playground, that can only be used for that playground. That's what this article means.
Oh, okay.
Okay, it doesn't get pooled in and then we're all buying swimming pools or doing some other thing. If a good example, a more usual example, would be student activity accounts, and funds such as that. They need to stay for those purposes.
Do we have debt? Like, do our different districts have debt? A lot of debt?
Well,
Bond
MVU had a $2.9 million bond, and we're moving forward with a lot of construction. Highgate is discussing, is moving forward with a bond project. There are a lot of capital projects. The roof is still not on, right? All the way?
Not completely.
Not completely. So, Highgate has a bond, and Sheldon is discussing a bond that it would be bringing to the next school district. And these are not new things. This is not like, hey, let's improve our building and make it fancy.
Oh, no.
Especially
These
when you're
are-
talking a roof.
These are all things
For the
that,
parking lot.
and yes,
Mhm.
you all parked. You can see.
Madam Chair,
Oh, I'm sorry.
just a little bit of clarification to that. Those funds that are created, following the requirements to create a reserve fund are the ones that will remain, but that doesn't count carryover funds or non-restricted funds. If it's a dedicated fund,
Yeah.
then you're gonna lose that dedicated fund, because that'll be absorbed in the, just like the indebtedness, the dedicated fund is not a reserve fund, so any dedicated funds or any unspent funds at the end of the fiscal year, that's gonna go into the,
Unless it's,
only the reserve funds are gonna be protected. The legally reserved funds, that means that those funds were voted by the electorate for a specific reason.
but I thought we just gave an example of student accounts being one that would stay separate.
Well, if it's not voted money by the electorate, it's not protected, so it'll be part of the assets of the reserve district.
So that's when we'll look into,
Yeah.
make sure that,
Asset or liability.
Mhm.
that we have, clarity around how we can either.
Spend all your money that's not reserved.
We talked about
So Article 6, what we've been talking about before, talks about the conveyance of real and personal property, including the property of the new district, the subsequent sale of real property to the town in which it's located in the future, and the subsequent sale of real property conveyed by forming districts, that if it was a union district. And it requires the forming districts to convey to the new district for the sum of $1 and subject to the encumbrances of record, all of their school-related real and personal property, including all land, buildings, and contents. So that's what is expected to occur, and the state believes has the authority to do that. And so now, this isn't moving forward. There we go. Subject to requirements related to school building closure in Article 4. If the new Union District Board determines that the real property conveyed to it by one or more forming districts will not be used for direct delivery of education in at least one grade or for any other purpose related to the operation of the new district, then the new district shall offer it for sale to the town in which the real property is located. So this is the provision that if for some reason, whether it was a building or it could just be a piece of land that we didn't feel we needed anymore, that it would be offered to the town first.
Does
And
it condition that sale as being at $1 and?
Yeah, there it is.
Okay, there we go.
Oh,
I didn't
okay.
see it in the.
For the
actual-
sum of $1. No, we don't get to make a
Yeah.
big profit off it or anything like that
There,
from the
yeah.
community.
I was
It's for
wondering.
$1. Subject to the encumbrance of record, assumption of payment of all outstanding bonds and notes, repayment by any school construction aid, not that we've had any, and conveyance condition on town using the real property for community and public purposes for a minimum of 5 years. So they can't put up a Walmart or something in the school.
So they're gonna tell you what they can do with it for 5 years.
For 5 years, right.
Yeah.
So you don't want any of this to happen. I mean, this is not what we want. If a town elects to sell real property prior to 5 years of ownership, the town must compensate the new district for all capital improvements and renovations initiated after July 1, 2019, and prior to the sale of the town. If the town elects not to acquire ownership of the real property, then the new district must sell the property pursuant to Vermont statutes and upon such terms and conditions established by the new board. So if the town says no, then you go through the usual process of selling property, which is go to the electorate of all the communities and say, we want to sell to this developer and they're going to pay us X amount of money, that kind of thing,
I mean, where does that money go?
to the school district. That's if the town says no. They don't want it. Notwithstanding, oh, go ahead. Was there a question?
So what he just asked you, so it goes back to the school district as,
So say we closed MBU and tuitioned all of our kids. 'Cause I'm just using that as an example. And we offered to the town, MBU is a terrible example because it's sort of on two pieces of property, isn't it? Let's pretend it's just
it's
Swanton.
Highgate.
You drive in Swanton and you leave in Highgate.
Okay,
So it would be offered to the towns where it is. And if they said, no, we don't want it, there's debt associated with it, we can't afford it, we pass. Then the school could sell it to
Okay.
anyone who's interested,
Right.
but we'd have to go to the voters for permission first.
See, that's my point right there.
Yep.
Because you have to do the same thing if a, Article 6 of the default articles, or if there is a proposal to convey the property to a consolidated district for $1, you have to do the same thing. That's my point. I mean, you can't pick and choose when you can go to the voters and ask their permission to convey property. So that's all I'm gonna say about it. That's my point.
That is definitely the point of one of the major points, I think, of the litigation. The agency has obviously a different perspective on that. Gonna move to Article 7, if that's okay. Contracts.
Actually,
In
I have a question on
Chris?
Article 6.
Yep.
Per what Jay's been informing us and stuff, and that are the towns that are involved in the lawsuit, we have one set of lawyers, and we have, as boards, have a lawyer. Have we asked our lawyer about Article 6 and his, the opinions? Does it contradict with what the team of lawyers are saying?
Yes.
It does?
Okay.
So our attorney has said that these default articles are in place based upon this particular point in the law only. That Act 46 says the state board has the authority to create these districts, and that includes the conveyance of property. That is the argument that the agency, and that's their belief, that they did not change other areas of the statute because it is only this one time that the state board has the authority to do this. And that's probably the crux of this litigation, is whether that authority is correct or not.
Is that what you wanted to say, Jay?
I have brought with me, in anticipation of this discussion, all of the statutes that the attorneys are quoting that apply to this. So if you want, you're welcome to make copies of it. I won't go into it in detail now, but I've got it with me, so if you want a copy of the actual laws, you can read them yourself.
I think that's why it's important to have our attorney
Yep.
in direct contact with
With
the
them.
attorneys
Right.
working the lawsuit.
Well, you
so
got
that-
you have 7 attorneys that are working their butts off right now.
Yeah, and for us to look at a statute and to interpret it,
Yeah.
we're not lawyers.
Exactly.
So I think that's why we need to have our attorneys talking with our attorneys.
I was interested in that.
I'll tell you, in speaking with you guys for the last couple of weeks, as much as we have, I mean, it's just, it'll give you a headache within the first hour, guaranteed. It's just, it's unbelievable. I mean, they've got stacks of documents in their office that are, I mean, you have to.
Wow. I don't think I could last an hour.
And of course, one statute leads to the other, and the other
Yep.
statute leads to another, and it's as amended, and this, oh, jeez.
You like this lawyer stuff, though.
I do,
I know.
You're not enjoying yourself at all.
something wrong with me, I love to read,
And know the statutes.
this subject fascinates me.
Well, there you go. The more you read, the more you know. The more you
Yeah,
know, the smarter
there
you
you
grow.
go.
The smarter you grow, the stronger your
I'm
voice.
starting to get dangerous, so.
And when speaking your mind, you're making your views. I like that. Anyway, sorry, back to.
No.
I think it's confusing. I love that saying.
Yeah, it's neat.
So Article 7 is contracts. New districts will be required to provide transportation, assignment of staff, and implementation of curriculum in a manner that's consistent with all the contracts, collective bargaining agreements, and provisions of the law that are in effect during the year. And the new district must comply with Title 16, Chapter 53, Subchapter 3, regarding recognition of representatives and employees of the forming districts, if applicable. So that's not really an issue for us here, as you already have one organization that's represents your that your staff, both support staff and professional staff.
Thank goodness.
So there will be negotiations that will need to occur, particularly in support staff. But you're already ahead. And if there is a contract in place, until the contract runs out, the new district would be responsible for keeping that contract. In the absence of new collective bargaining agreement, the new district shall comply with the pre-existing master agreements. This is kind of what we've been talking about in Sheldon. The new district, in that case, an MVU district, will have to honor all employment contracts that are in place unless they negotiate something else. And for us, we're going to be talking later about our professional staff negotiation that will be in place up to July 1st, 2020. And then if we're merged after July 1st, we would need to be entering into negotiations with support staff. And if there isn't an agreement, which technically you'd want that agreement to be in place before July 1, 2019. I don't see that happening. You honor the existing contracts until such time that you negotiate a new contract. So here's a little bit about the organizational meeting. It requires that voters of a new district hold that meeting on or before January 29th. The superintendent must post notice of the day, hour, and place in at least one public place in each town. And in the newspaper, not more than 40 days and fewer than 30 before the date of that meeting. Secretary of Ed draws the warning for the organizational meeting, calls the meeting to order. The voters of the new union district transact the following business from the floor. So you will have your town clerks there signing people in to this meeting. And voters will elect a temporary and presiding officer and clerk for the new district and swear. Well, I didn't mean to do that. Let's go back. Pardon me. Swear in the members of the Transitional Board created in Article 9. So your board chair and board clerk would be the temporary Transitional Board members. Requires voters of the new district to hold an organizational meeting on or before January 29th on a date and a location to be determined by the superintendent, likely very late January and probably at MVU.
If you do it very late January, we wouldn't be able to make any changes to the amendments by the 28th, if it's too late.
Well, we can't because it's that board. Yeah, this is the part of the trickiness.
So it's not going to happen.
It's that board that would need to then warn the meeting so that it's done before February 29th.
Yeah.
Oh, I see. Okay.
That newly sworn in late January board is the one that would warn the meeting for February. I seem to be going backwards. My apologies, folks. Here we go. The electorate will need to adopt a Robert's Rules of Order, elect officers of the new district, a moderator and a clerk and a treasurer. We'll need to determine the date and location for the first annual meeting of the new district and all subsequent meetings. Typically that's town meeting day, when the annual meeting of the school district is. And determine whether to vote on the new district's budget and all other public questions by Australian ballot. Because even if it's held on town meeting day, it wouldn't be part of your town meeting. There are things we could do to inform the electorate before town meeting in the same room. They could suspend the meeting and then there could be a presentation. But typically in schools that merge, that have had town meeting, they vote by Australian ballot in their home schools. And there is a process to really inform voters. That's typically what's done. The other alternative, which is an alternative, is that you hold a meeting the way you used to with MVU, probably later in the afternoon when the local town meetings have finished, and people vote from the floor.
The meeting was always held like the end of February. It was not
Yeah,
held
it
on
wasn't-
town meeting.
Wasn't
day.
held.
It wasn't town meeting
So-
day.
So that's an option.
Right.
Totally
Yep.
different day.
Yep. Because the same day would just be ridiculous. People would be
Boy.
exhausted.
Yeah,
They
that wouldn't
wouldn't
make
come.
any sense.
No.
You'd have to determine whether to elect members of the new Union District Board by Australian ballot. Determine and approve compensation, if any, to be paid to the officers and members of the new Union District Board. So the treasurer, the clerk, and then board members. Establish provisions for the payment of any expense incurred by the new Union District before it becomes fully operational. So you need to make some provision for legal costs, if any, for example. And authorize the new Union District to borrow money pending receipt of payments from the State Education Fund by issuance of its notes and orders payable not later than 1 year from the date. So that's that whole being able to borrow in anticipation of taxes, but it's not taxes anymore. Determine whether to authorize the Board of School Directors to provide mailed notice to residents of the availability of the annual report and proposed school budget in lieu of distributing the annual report and proposed budget. So that's something apparently we have to vote on. You all mail out currently very detailed town reports. So you would have to vote on whether you're gonna continue to do that or whether you do something different. You can mail out a notice saying it's available online, it's available at your town clerk's office, things like that. Bless you. And address any other business deemed to be necessary.
I'm
at
just
that
gonna do a
meeting.
little check-in,
Yep,
cause it's 8:33,
it's
and according to
8:33.
we're gonna get on to new business, but I mean, I think this is important, I don't know how everybody else is feeling, what do we wanna do at this point?
I can't emphasize this enough, and I don't mean to insult anybody in this room, but please, run if you're seriously considering articles like this, please run them by David Kelly and his group. I can't emphasize that enough. If you don't, I'm sure you're gonna regret it.
I think Bob articulated a really good plan, I think it's in the minutes, right? Kira, And Julie agreed that our attorneys already agreed to have a discussion.
Yeah, but David Kelly and his group.
That's who I
Yes,
think we're
that's
talking
Who
what
our
she-
attorneys are gonna talk to,
That's
that's
a
the
good
plan.
point.
Oh, okay, you didn't, okay. Thank you.
So, the transition board speaks a little bit about the powers of the transition board. That there will be a chair and a clerk of the board. And the board of a forming district may, by majority vote, designate another board member or members to serve on that transitional board. So here we're talking about the temporary transition board, not the elected board. So MVU is a part of the transition board before it's voted on. And Dennis is the chair, the clerk is, I think, John Ho. I think the chair is expected to be part of I'm just smiling at you like, darn. But, the
But I do
MVU,
like to designate another board member. I remember.
I thought you'd pick up on that.
I think that means in
The
addition,
majority of the
right?
board has to approve that, Dennis.
Right.
So I can make that happen.
So, for example, that's exactly right. If for some reason, either the chair or the clerk were unable to do it, the majority of the board could designate somebody else.
Well, I can give you an example. I'm the clerk in Swanton, but I'm
Yeah.
gonna be away in the month of February.
Okay.
And early March, and some in January, so in
So
that case,
that's
if I'm
really-
on that, I'm not gonna be
Yeah.
able to, someone will have to.
So that's a
Okay,
good
what
example
is
of what the
Already
local
have
board
plans.
should have that conversation about,
Yeah.
who should be their designees.
Priorities, John.
FaceTime.
You need to give up your plan.
There's always Skype. There's always
Okay,
Skype,
so
John.
I'm for it.
John, we do Skype. You can do Skype from sailboats, right?
From sailboat.
The transition board members will serve until the voters of the new union district elect members of their initial board, set forth in the next article. And the superintendent of the supervisory union must convene the first meeting of the transitional board no later than 14 days after the organizational meeting. And we talked about this before. Usually you do it that same night. You have the organizational meeting and then the first board meeting. The agenda of the first meeting must include the election of one of their members to serve as chair and one of their members to serve as clerk. The purpose and authority of that board is to serve as the new union district's board, to perform all functions it has authority granted to,
Budget.
yeah, skipping that, because it basically says it has the authority to do what it has authority to do.
Based on this Article 9.
That's right. Essentially, that is to,
Feedback loop here.
and why is this not going?
There's 14, by the way.
I
14 in
know,
case people
there's
were-
14 of these. Specifically, to prepare a draft of the proposed budget for FY20 and to prepare and warn the following items. The new union district initial board and meeting of the new union district, and when that should happen. So, and any amendments to the default articles, so we're back to that one. So this transitional board is the one that has the authority to warn that meeting. The initial representation on the new board, this is the Article 10 now, the elected board. It says 8 individuals, it wouldn't be 8 in our, it would
Yeah.
be 6. And it's based on the hybrid model, and it's 2 seats per community. The length of term for the initial board members is put in these articles, and for us, they just created a little chart, and they just assigned who gets a 1-year term and who gets a 2-year term and who has a 3-year term. And then when people's terms are up, then they all become 3-year terms.
Ah, okay. That's so weird that they didn't just make them all 3 years or whatever.
Well, they have to stagger them.
That makes sense.
And that has been the case all along, so even in voluntary mergers, they directed people to do that. The transitional board dissolves upon the first meeting of the new district board. So, those folks, the board chair and clerk of the 4 school districts that are participating in the transition board, they step down. Some of those folks may be the same people who run. Some of them may not. But I think, should we be moving forward, it is important to have as much continuity as possible, so people know our budgets and know where we are with our schools. And so at the first meeting of this new board, the members of the old transition board will present the draft 2020 board to that newly elected board, and they're the ones that have the authority to adopt it and warn a meeting for it to be voted upon. again, that's why that consistency. If you have a whole new group of people, they're gonna wanna start from scratch. Oh dear.
My water. You're doing a great job, Julie.
I'm
going
hanging
through
in
this
there. It's
stuff.
not my
It's like-
presentation. It's always hard to read somebody else's.
Yes, yes.
I'm familiar with it all, but, so, and the voters of the new district must vote at a special meeting that this new board warns, for the budget.
I think we're starting to get to overload.
Right. So Article 11's around representation, and we've talked about how this, the default articles are based on the hybrid model.
Which, if we're
and
going forward, is something that was really important to the communities.
it certainly was. Each member of the new union board who serves after the expiration of the terms for the initial will have a 3-year term. So just as I described in our articles that they gave to us, they have some people whose term will end in 2020, some in 2021, some in 2022, so that it's staggered. And then as people are reelected, it'll be for 3-year terms. So, Article 12, the new union, we're almost there. The new union district board has and shall exercise all of the authority that is necessary for it to prepare for the full educational operations beginning July 1. So it could engage in negotiations, it has the authority to sign contracts, or just conduct any business on behalf of the new district board. It would be the one hiring new teachers, for example. On and before June 30th, 2019, the new board shall perform all planning, transitional, and other related duties necessary, and each forming district remains responsible for educating its resident students until July 1. So, Highgate, Swanton, MVU, all of our local districts will stay in place and are responsible up until June 30th, really. And then they dissolve. They cease to exist when business is completed. Sometimes things such as an audit might require a school, a former district, to reconvene, but unless that's done before December 31st, 2019, then it would be too late. Each new union district that is not a supervisory district, and this one would become a supervisory district, would be assigned to a supervisory union. So Sheldon is an example of that. They're being assigned to a district that will be assigned to a new supervisory union. And we would become a supervisory district. And Article 14 speaks to those articles that can be amended and how they can be amended. So we'll need to look at those closely as we talk about what we may or may not want to amend. Some of them they say can't be amended because they're law. Others, such as the name of the school district, a board could just change. Others would need to be the majority of all 3 towns. Some might be, such as the closing of a school, for example, would be the individual town. But for the most part, we're looking at amendments being the majority of all 3 municipalities. But they go through and identify which articles can be amended and by which body. So, in the process for amending, and obviously this will be shared with you, for amendments presented on or before February 28th at a meeting warned by the Transitional Board, any proposed amendments shall be presented to the voters of the entire new union district. And, I hate that when I scroll, it doesn't just scroll. 90-day period from the date of issuance of statewide plan to form committee, draft articles of agreement for the new district, hold at least one public hearing, take comments, and hold a vote. That's pretty tight, particularly when 60 days of that is taken up by our sort of waiting to hold that organizational meeting.
Yeah.
But, again, we will have our attorney speak with David Kelly and his group so that they can advise our local boards around that. Are there any questions? I'm kind of
Yeah, you
feel like I'm
It's good.
it's in the sort of other category here. There are a lot of questions, I know, but again, this was presentation put together by the Vermont School Board Association to help school boards sort of through this
That's
process.
just helpful. Are we gonna meet in January? Is that when we're gonna finalize all this? basically?
January 2nd is our next meeting.
And that's when we'll come up with who's who in there on this transition and all that kind of stuff? If we haven't heard anything else?
Transition is probably gonna come from the local, from the,
Right.
from the school,
But we gotta give them
Okay,
some
that's
kind
fine.
of list.
Certainly our local districts
We need to
will
campaign.
be determining.
there you go.
We could all campaign
I can
that
hear
night.
Dennis now trying to drum up support for somebody else to be on this transition board.
Exactly, that's
So
what-
our local boards would be doing
He's ready
that.
to appoint.
Okay.
That's right.
Okay, local boards will do that, good point.
And
Yeah, we should have that now.
Okay, thank you.
And I'll be in touch with board chairs about what kind of communication they want with attorneys at their local board meetings, or if they want that to be at the SU meeting in January, or
Mhm.
I'm looking at Bob thinking you probably want somebody for next week.
Yeah.
All right,
Mm.
have that feeling.
I find it incredibly ironic that they still call these the Articles of Agreement when 3 of our 4 communities involved in this voted unanimously
Yes,
against
Right.
this course of action.
exactly.
Who exactly is agreeing to these?
You're not agreeing.
Didn't we all disagree with it?
Yeah.
Not unanimously.
Yeah,
Swan.
unanimously, it was 3,
Oh,
and
gotcha,
majority in
gotcha.
Swanton was, so all our communities voted against it.
3 of them
Artic-
unanimously.
We can't call them articles of disagreement
Okay.
now.
I like it. It works for
I like it
me.
too. It kind of goes along with the effing school district.
That is, I was not going there, Terry.
Anyway, why are we a school district? I got my little suspicions up on that, that all of a sudden I'm realizing we're not a union, we're a school, we're not a supervisory union.
No, it's, this process is to create a unified union school district.
I got a little bit, you know,
And you don't have to have 2 U's in your name, you can have just unified. But,
we're just a
yes,
district.
we would be becoming a supervisory district, but it's called a unified school district.
Okay. Okay, so any comments or suggestions about this before we move on to new business?
So, well, Julie, just
Yeah.
asking the responsibility, because I know we had this discussion at Sheldon last time at our meeting, the responsibility of us after town meeting day and this board moving forward through the rest of the year, and understanding that, because I know in Sheldon we were talking about Julia's term is up.
Yeah.
And so for people here whose term is up, but this board still will have some things to do, how, how, what's gonna be
Yep.
here, what do we need to have for
Thank you for
that
bringing
process?
that up, because I meant to talk about that,
Yeah.
but I didn't know why I got distracted. There's a lot. We have had, there are multiple things we could do. We could put people on the for town meeting to be elected for 3 months, which is gonna be pretty darn confusing as a way to go about it. The advice I've received, which makes the most sense to me personally, is that let's just take Julia. She's no longer on the board as of town meeting day. Your next board meeting, the other 2 of you appoint Julia to that seat for the remainder of the school board, because it's a vacancy. So all the local boards can do that.
That makes sense.
Appoint or offer?
Appoint with, bribery and so forth.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
A point
cookies.
with a gentleman's agreement beforehand or ladies' agreement.
right,
whatever,
that,
beforehand.
obviously somebody would have to be willing to do it,
Yeah.
but,
Well,
you know.
yeah.
And if they're not willing, then you might have to go through the other 3 months. or
So,
something.
but the local boards are expected to continue and through July 1.
Right.
So we are or are not going to be electing those open
No,
seats
you would
at
not.
town meeting.
If everything goes according to this scenario, you would not be electing new people unless you really wanted to for 3 months. You would appoint say Bob was up. You are up. All right, let's say Bob's up. So
But I'm not.
you and John, after town meeting, would appoint Bob to the board. And his term would expire on June 30.
No, not appoint, offer.
Offer, right?
Beg, beg, borrow, steal,
And in the
bribe.
in the meantime, Bob will be running for the new board.
Maybe.
Right.
That all changes if you have an injunction.
Absolutely.
Totally.
Right.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
Totally.
Well, the legislature's rumored to maybe make changes in the timelines too.
Exactly.
That's another possible variable in there.
Yep.
Yeah.
So there's also a bill being presented to abolish the agency of education.
Which I said to Jay would just mean they give the work to us.
Yeah, good point.
And that would be different from now in what way?
I know. Given the conversation today, you're exactly
The
right.
fiscal.
That would be, I think that would be a great bill, but
I think you're right, but I don't know that it would be. It'd be
So,
something, that's for
That was
sure.
a good question. Any other questions at this point?
All those in favor?
Okay, let's go to the next one, which is the new business. And it's new and not new, right? It's
Correct. I put it under new because it was new. It was newer.
requires an action.
It certainly does. So we had a negotiations committee that met one time. Chris was the chair, and he loves being chair of these one-time committees.
Yeah, it was great.
So the board and the this board and the committee, the negotiations committee, agreed with the professional staff association that we should have a memo of understanding with the association that would extend our current contract for 1 year, that teachers would receive a step or the equivalent of a step, and that the two side letters would continue. One that was an omission from the contract that would continue to have teachers have a prep period, and one that speaks to our healthcare reimbursement program and who's the first payer and last payer. So those side letters were agreed to as well. Additionally, because we do not want two separate side letters or two separate ways of administering a health reimbursement, and the side letter had covered both support staff and professional staff. The side letter that this group will be looking at today covers both support staff and professional staff around that healthcare reimbursement. So, and you discussed it in your last meeting, and now we are going to, this is the first meeting where we will be approving / ratifying this memo of understanding and signing, and that'll be done at each local board as well, and this association will also be doing that. So the hope is that by the end of the month, we will have an agreement carrying us through for next year.
And so the question begins here in terms of, do we need to go into more detail now and if we do, with the executive session?
Yeah.
Or do we all feel comfortable based on our executive session last time to go ahead and take the action this time?
Seemed like it was pretty straightforward. I don't think there's any more specifics we need than what we've already discussed. At least that's my opinion.
Does anyone have a different opinion?
Well, is what we're approving tonight only applicable to the supervisory union employees, or is the local boards going to be separately approving
Yes.
this for their employees?
Each board will ratify and approve the agreement. You have an SU-wide agreement, but each board is a signatory.
So this is only, this is employees that are
This is
employed
part-
by the supervisory union,
Yes.
right?
Tonight.
Does anyone else need to go? Does anyone else need details that they think it'd be best to would put any premature public knowledge would put board or parties at a substantial disadvantage? No, sounds like we're ready then to discuss it. We saw the letter, you sent
Mhm.
it out, so everybody had a chance to read it.
Mm.
Any discussion, or does someone want to make a motion?
I would be willing to make the motion to approve that memo of understanding.
I'd second motion.
Any discussion? Okay, all in favor?